Okay, this is part 5 of the ancient Greeks, paintings of them and their history. And the emphasis here, of course, is on the paintings. This picture right here is the mother of Achilles dipping him into the river Styx, except for his heel. She's holding him by his heel. And so the rest of his body will be protected. He's the greatest warrior of the ancient Greek times, but he has a weakness in his heel. That's called the Achilles heel. Now, Achilles, when he was raised, he was lucky enough to have a mentor of Chiron. Chiron was the brilliant centaur that was a very good teacher, and he was very good at the healing arts. Kind of like what Asclepius was to men, Chiron was also to the centaurs. He knew about healing, and he gave Achilles some training, so Achilles was, for that time, relatively well educated. Now here is a painting of the Judgment of Paris. Now Paris was a prince of Troy, which is near ancient Greece, like Athens and Sparta and whatnot. And he was given the task to judge who is the most beautiful woman. Now Zeus had a chance at it, but Zeus was smarter. He wanted no part of this. He knew nothing good could come from this. So Paris chose Helen of Troy. Well, actually, he chose Aphrodite, and she would give him whatever he wanted, and he wanted Helen of Troy to sleep with her. Helen of Troy was the most beautiful woman in Greece. She was the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. So obviously, this was a stupid thing to get himself involved in, but that's what Paris did. And that's Aphrodite. He's choosing her as the most beautiful of the goddesses. All right. So then, here's another painting of the Judgment of Paris. Okay, it was one of those key moments in male stupidity. And then he took Helen of Troy. Well, he took her from Sparta. She was originally Helen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. And this is Paris taking her, abducting her in a sense, under the guidance of Aphrodite, Venus, to take her to Troy. Not a good idea. So you can see that war is coming because the men of Sparta are united with the men of Athens and other Greeks to go to Troy and to bring Helen back. Okay, so this is again the mother Thetis, mother of Achilles, and she's begging Zeus to spare the life of her son because the prophecy is that Achilles will either live a life of quiet obscurity and live till old age and have children, or he will go and fight in a war and become a great hero, but he will die. So she doesn't want her son to die. She begs Zeus for mercy on her son. Now, they run into a problem getting started, the soldiers of the Greeks, and they can't get the winds to get their ships to take them to Troy. So there's a prophecy to Agamemnon, he's the general, the leader of the Greeks, that in order to get the wind, the gods are not happy, so in order to please the gods, he must make a sacrifice, and they want him to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. Now Agamemnon is married to a woman named Clytemnestra, okay? And because he's so eager to go out and fight in Troy, he sacrifices his own daughter, a human sacrifice, which is a very sick, crazy thing to do. Agamemnon was a jerk, okay? Now, here one can see that the Trojan War happens. The Greeks are fighting with the Trojans. And it's pretty much of a stalemate. For 10 years they fight back and forth and very little progress is made. However, then Achilles, Agamemnon being the jerk that he is, he stole the mistress of Achilles away from him. So Achilles was pissed off and he said, screw you, I'm not going to fight. I'm just going to sit around in my tent and I'm not going to fight. And without Achilles, the Greeks were even weaker. And the Trojans started to gain some momentum. Patroclus, who was the best friend of Achilles, decided to take Achilles' armor and to go fight himself against the Trojans. And he was a pretty successful warrior. However, Patroclus then fought against Hector. Hector was the lead prince, the brave warrior hero of the Trojans. And when they came head to head, Hector slew Patroclus. And now Achilles sees that his friend Patroclus is dead. Patroclus had put on the armor of Achilles, and that made the Trojans afraid. But Patroclus went too far, came head to head with Hector, and he was slain. All right, but now Achilles goes into a major wrath. He goes apeshit bananas. Major wrath of Achilles. This is the famous wrath of Achilles. And Achilles makes a decision. He's going to fight, and the Greeks are going to win and get this over with. So Achilles, the wrath of Achilles, he now comes, and he's looking for blood. He wants Hector. Okay? So Achilles has his showdown with Hector. Here's Hector before he leaves Troy, and he says goodbye to his wife Andromache, to his baby Astyanax, and Hector goes out to meet Achilles in man-to-man combat. And Achilles is victorious. He kills Hector. Hector is slain, then Achilles ties him to the back of his horse-drawn carriage, and drags him on the ground in front of Troy, and the people of Troy are watching this. Their beloved leader Hector being dragged behind the chariot of Achilles, the wrath of Achilles. And these are just more paintings of the same thing, the wrath of Achilles dragging Hector behind his chariot. And here's another painting of the wrath of Achilles dragging Hector behind his chariot. Then Achilles takes the body back to the Greek camp, and now the king of Troy is Priam. So Priam is the father of both Hector and of Paris, the two princes of Troy. And Hector, the Prince Priam goes to Achilles and he begs him to have the body back of his son Hector so that he can have a proper burial. And Achilles is now calmed down a little bit from his wrath. He's sad, he cries too, and he gives the body back of Hector to the father, King Priam. Okay, so more time goes by, and the Greeks now devise a plan to use a Trojan horse, a very big horse, bigger than this actually. This is a painting by Giovanni Domenico Tiepolo. And the Trojan horse is a way that's so big you can hide men inside of it, and then their job is to get inside the gates of Troy and then at night to unlock the gates so the rest of the Trojan soldiers can flood in. Here's a better representation of a big Trojan horse. It's a little bit hard to believe this one would get through the gates, but here's a big Trojan horse, and you can see these are the Greek soldiers at night climbing out of the Trojan horse so that they then can open up the gates to let in the main force of the Greek soldiers, and they can sack Troy. And that's exactly what happens. So that's a Trojan horse. It sneaks in pretending to be a gift, and this is where the phrase comes, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Now Laocoon is a Trojan priest, and he warns the Trojans, do not accept this gift, this Trojan horse. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. This is some sort of trap. He senses that. But Athena sends 2 snakes and 2 serpents to attack him and his sons, and he is silenced, and the Trojans do not listen to him. By the way, this is described as being a famous Greek statue. Me personally, I have a suspicion that Michelangelo made this statue later on for the money. It's just too perfect, too magnificent, and Michelangelo needed money at the time, so how convenient that he should find this magnificent statue. Perhaps the most high-skilled statue to ever come out of the ancient Greeks. Again, I think Michelangelo made it. Other people would dispute that. The Greeks did make a lot of good statues. I'm going to show more of them later in this talk. I've already shown several of them. And they were very sophisticated. Nothing like it ever had been done in the ancient world before the Greeks started making their lifelike statues. They were quite magnificent. Now here we come back to the Achilles heel. Paris, the prince who was the brother of Hector and the now husband of Helen of Troy, he shot an arrow through the heel of Achilles, and it was dabbed with some toxic material, and it killed Achilles. So Achilles dies. This is Andromache, and she is mourning the death of Hector, Prince Hector of Troy, who had been slain by Achilles. Painting is by Jacques-Louis David. He would later become a very famous artist in the events of France from 1789 to 1794. Okay, now here is Andromache in captivity, and she was sort of the symbolic woman of a virtuous, good woman. You know, she's very sad. After they killed her husband Hector and then they sacked Troy, they took her son Astyanax and they threw him off the walls of Troy because they didn't want him to come back to avenge his father. Okay, so she is now alone, and she is forced to be a concubine of the man who threw her son off the wall, Neoptolemus. So it's a very sad fate for Andromache. Okay, and that's sort of like, you'll hear more about this. There were plays written about the fate of the women of Troy. But just so you sort of heard about that event in Andromache, that will be useful to know later if you're interested in studying the Greeks. Okay, this now is Aeneas. Aeneas was one of the Trojans too, and he is carrying his father Anchises out of Troy. And it's the idea of you carry the legacy of your father with you. And part of carrying the legacy of your father is the physical body of his father, which he's carrying in the picture, also with his son and his wife. But it's also the idea of that it's one of the responsibilities of the son to learn the culture, the history of his forefathers, the great achievements of the men in his group that came before him. Okay, so he's carrying the legacy of his father out of there as well. Here's another picture, another version of Aeneas carrying his father Anchises out of Troy with the son and the wife in tow. Okay? And then, in a sense, I could relate to that. I'm carrying the legacy of Dr. McDougall into the new world, so to speak, to make sure that it is known to help people. Okay? Now here's a similar painting. This painting is actually from the last day of Pompeii when a volcano eruption covered Pompeii. But it's very much like that idea, burning Troy and, you know, the young strong men carrying out their fathers from the town as it was collapsing. Okay. Okay, now that's it for our paintings of the Iliad. There's other paintings, and sometimes they call it the Idiot and the Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey, but there's other paintings of the Iliad. There's also classic comics, which I think are a good thing to read. Young people should know this. If you want to be an educated person, you should know about the ancient Greeks. They're the greatest thing that ever came out of the ancient world. You know, that and the Bible. Okay, those are the two big, great things that came out of the ancient world. It's a rather extraordinary story. All through English literature, you're going to hear it. Through philosophy, you're going to hear about it. The ancient Greeks were extraordinary, and the Iliad and the Odyssey were, in a sense, kind of like their founding books, like their Bible, if you will. But also the leaders that came out of ancient Greece. In the next phase, we're getting into the golden age of Athens here. You will see they have shaped events for the rest of the history of the world. Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed that, found that useful.